Greetings. My name is Justin, and I'm going to be exploring some soft sci-fi here. Basically, what I've done is I've come up with these ideas from how I view the world. And what I'm hoping to do is really just kind of create something that others can look at and say, that's interesting. I wonder what that would look like in a book or in some sort of TV show or whatever it is. This is purely explorative, and I'm hoping others can get something out of it. So what I'm doing here is I'm calling this the blueprint. And basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to examine several concepts. The first of which is corporate media. The second will be something I call thrall. And the final will be something called social calculus. Now, social calculus is probably most similar to the Isaac Asimov concept of psychohistory. And in fact, I was really surprised when I first heard about psychohistory because I said to myself, wow, that's exactly what I'm doing. Now, I wasn't chased around by some imaginary group of people who were actually real, but in fact, were part of the process that Selden needed to develop the psychohistory, which is really quite interesting. But that's not the place to talk about it here. So what I just want you to do is kind of listen and see what you think. I want to talk first about what the goal of corporate media is. Ultimately, the goal is synergy, a collaboration of artists, maybe an inclusion of fans. But what happens is they all work together and things start to happen when you put a group of people together. Right now, media is real solitary. We have artists who play a song and they sing and they dance, but it's them. Or maybe they'll have a band or a group behind them like D12 or Rough Riders or whatever it might be. But as a whole, we're not bringing in artists who are sculptors into this process. We're not bringing in movie writers to spur the singers on. Think about the Moulin Rouge movie. Now, what happened was we put a bunch of singers together. They did some songs, and then there was a movie that kind of teed off from that. Now, what would happen had each of those artists been in the movie, but also had written a CD about the experiences of a character? Now, instead of having one CD, you'd have 5 or however many it would be. And that's really what we're getting at here. The synergy behind this process calls for creating hard art. It calls for creating soft art like songs, hard art like sculptures and paintings. And ideally, we would see this demonstrated in a wing of a museum, and these people would be traveling along through this wing, and they would be listening to the music as they went. And they'd be seeing this sculpture of Christina Aguilera's crazy hair person, or some CD about the lead male character. I haven't seen that movie in a long time, I'll admit, but it really was the first thing that came to mind when I thought about what could happen. And now the other interesting thing is there's these little YouTube clips that go along with music, with songs. And I mean, especially it seems like Lana Del Rey is attracting these artists who are making these little clips of movies and putting them into a song. And it's fantastic. I mean, it is fantastic. I love it. And it's so cool because, you get to listen to a song, and then a few days later, these fans start putting out this art, and it just tees off from that song, and it captures this whole new perspective. Now, I would be amiss if I didn't talk about Lana Del Rey's and Halsey's little moviettes that they did. Hopeless Fountain Kingdom has this movie that goes along with it. And I mean, these two artists are superb because Lana also took Born to Die and made this like whole storyline through this CD. And we see the Adam and Eve saga. We see this like femme fatale maybe, or like this guy, and it's great. And Hopeless Fountain Kingdom actually has this almost like trailer like lead up in the prologue. And now prologues and interludes and the whole thing are fantastic. I love those. So I think it's really cool that they did this, but it's also really fantastic to be seeing how these things come together and what could happen if we had a song for each of, a CD for each of the Marvel characters. The Marvel Universe is like the archetype to the T of what could happen if you like began to put things together and do it. Now, I also want to talk a little bit about how this could happen. And this is where it really starts to get into science fiction. And because I believe that when you release something to the public, or even when you talk to someone, maybe you're overheard, or whatever it is, when you create information going to a person, it has a signature, a harmonic, perhaps, a psychic harmonic for sure. Now, I just want to kind of make it clear that if this was to happen, okay, so if we have artists who are creating a CD for a character, and there's a movie about this, and there's sculptures, and there's plays, and there's these people running around spreading the news about this work. I mean, it would be gargantuan. I believe that a venue like Twitter to be designing this corporate work is essential. Because what I see happening is people start releasing the information out onto Twitter. People start looking when they see these kind of like lead-offs, these teases, things like that. And they start searching, and they're spending energy, and they're learning about what's happening. And they're seeing the exchange eventually between two artists or three artists. And they're hearing this. Now, it's got to create some kind of vibe in the universe. I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm a pretty solid kind of believer that real action is real action. Like, if you want a real action, you go out, you write a letter, you send it to someone, and you say, hey, what's up? Write me back. And that person writes back and blah, blah, blah. And you start this process. But also, I could go on Twitter, and let's just say that somehow, however it is, maybe I know this person, maybe they just see my post or whatever. They see my intent, and they start reading it, and they start looking at other posts that I've made. And what happens is they start to put off energy, perhaps, related to this. And so maybe it's going to spill over in their actions every day, or whatever it is. But ultimately, I think that if these artists are talking about this on Twitter, maybe using subterfuge even. Maybe they're kind of hiding the fact that they're talking about this. Or they're just, maybe they're, I don't know. I think about Pizzagate and these codes that supposedly is happening. And that's just bombastically asinine. But what if there was something like that, where people were communicating, who knew each other and knew what the codes were communicating, and then everybody's like scurrying around trying to find out what CD is going to be out next, and who's going to be on it, and what the artists are going to do, and what the sculptors are going to do, and the painters, and all of a sudden, bam, you have this massive release, and that would be fantastic, I think. Now, I spoke briefly and alluded to the energy that a post can have on a person. And I just want to say that I think this Harry Seldon thing, this psychohistory, this social calculus, I think that could really guide interactions between people. So think about this. Okay, so you're Harry Seldon, you're running around, you're being chased by these people who aren't actually chasing him, but they're just trying to create the math, so to speak. Okay, so we got that. Now, think about if Harry Seldon used his psychohistory to get all these people to leave, right? So he comes up with this idea that things are going to disintegrate or something, and so they leave. That's a pretty direct approach. But what if we had a person who... Okay, so let's say that we can map a chemistry equation using whatever it's called. So we have hydrogen, we have oxygen, we put them together, we get H2O. We know how much of one, how much of another, and the outcome. So what if we could do that with behavior? What if we could have a periodic table of behaviors, and we know the probable outcomes of each behavior, we know what happens when you put them together. I mean, this is not so far-fetched. And in fact, that's exactly what I'm working on doing myself, which is why I wanted to talk today about this. Because what if we could have someone who is part of an equation? So let's just call this one person hydrogen, another person oxygen. Oxygen is what you would maybe call a ringer. I call them life models. They go to this place, they talk with hydrogen, and they create water. It's that simple. And it's calculatable to maybe like 100 iterations. So let's just say there's 50 iterations a day that you go through. And so that would be 2 days. So hypothetically, we could predict the future 2 days into the future. It gets complicated because each iteration adds another degree of uncertainty. And as the mass of behaviors increase, the mass of the unlikeliness uncertainty also increases. So it's complex, but we have great computers now. We have things that the first psychologists did not have, and they undertook to map these equations just with their own knowledge. And it's fantastic because these people undertook to map these equations, to write them, to understand them in a manner that was precise and rather simple. But they did it even though they didn't have the information that we have. And right now we have just bytes upon bytes upon bytes to million degree of information available to us. And so given that information, given what we know, given the computing power and how quickly it is growing, this is a rather simple equation to think about. It will be. So that being said, I think it's interesting that maybe we could make equations happen just by saying the right words to the right person. It's like this. You say something kind to someone and they say something kind to another person. It's that very basic thing that is key to social calculus. So the original psychologists had very little that they were working with. They chose to practice these all-encompassing, far-reaching, spanning theories. And so here we are, where we're writing these theories that are important, but yet are very limited. And I find myself coming to a point where, like, ultimately, the goal is really singular. But what I would challenge you, perhaps as an artist, perhaps as a writer, perhaps as a sculptor, a musician, whatever it might be, I would challenge you in this time when we are in a heavy spot for the country to come into your own place and create some art, but have that art be revolutionary. Describe what you would see happening if one candidate was elected. What would you see happening if another was elected? I would also see that if we're really going to start working towards this goal of corporate music, corporate art, corporate storytelling, that we need to unite under an emblem. And so I would suggest that if you do this, that you include the phoenix emblem. The phoenix is an emblem of rising up out of the ashes, moving forward into something new and powerful and stronger than what you were before. And so when you write this piece, just put a little note about the phoenix, however you want. It might be a picture of a phoenix. It might be a line about the phoenix. It might be a map of the city of Phoenix. I don't know. But let's do this together, and maybe this is our call to action.